daily class. I hope that you are having a great day and enjoying your summer as much as possible. I know it's a crazy summer, this pandemic and stuff, but it's been we gotta just live life and do our thing and things like that. Thank you for joining us. Arla. Quiet in your class, okay? So, thank you for tuning in. It's going to make sure that we are live. And, yeah, we are. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world. Please comment. And we would love to hear about what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, where you're watching from, how your summer's going, if you have any questions on what we're talking about, and so on and so forth. So today's topic is, why does Jewish law recognize matrilineal descent factor for Jewish identity? Okay, halachic Judaism, obviously, you could identify however you want, and you can consider yourself Jewish regardless. It's up to you. But when it comes to Jewish law, traditionally, Jewish law recognizes matrilineal descent as the deciding factor of Judaism. That means if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. And it goes from mother to son to daughter. It goes from parent to child, but only through the mother. So why is it that this is this way? Why specifically the mom? Okay? So to start off, I tell a story of a woman. Her name was Rivka. Her phone rang, and she sprang to answer the phone. She said, "Darling, how are you?" came the voice on the other end of the line. "This is Mommy calling." "Oh, Mommy," said Rivka, crying. "I'm having a terrible day. The baby won't eat, and the washing machine broke. I've sprained my ankle, and I'm hobbling around. On top of that, the house is a mess, and we're having company for dinner, and I didn't even start cooking yet, or shopping even, and I don't know what I'm going to do." So the voice on the other side sounded sympathetic and said, "Darling, don't worry about this. Mommy's got this. I'll come on over and I will take care of everything that we need." One second. I'm giving a text. Okay, I'm live, so, and I'll take care of everything. I know somebody that can fix the washing machine. I'll take care of the baby. I'll shop. I'll cook. Everything's gonna be fine. Don't worry about it. Mommy's got this all. And I'll even call David, your husband, in the office, and I'll tell him to help out once in a while. So, Mom she says, "David? Who's David?" She says, "Your husband, David." She says, "My husband's name is not." So she says, "Well, is this 407 123 456 78? Whatever number?" She says, "No, this is a different number." mothers, and they do so much. And today's question, as we said, the question is all about why.
Is it finished?
Why does Judaism go based on? Okay, so reality is it could be troubling or hurtful when a person who identifies as a Jew and always considered themselves Jewish is confronted with the fact that Jewish law does not regard him or her as a Jew. Many in this situation often ask, why does Jewish law consider matrilineal descent for Jewish identity? But in truth, it's not really a question they're looking to answer. Rather, it's a question they're asking. And what's interesting about this question is that one would expect things to be the opposite way around. Throughout the ancient world, the parent who mattered most was the father. Indeed, the Greek philosopher Aeschylus said, and I quote, "The woman you call your mother of a child, the woman you call the mother of a child is not the parent. She is merely the nurse of the seed that was sown inside of her." And yet, Jewish law asserts that the father, for this crucial matter of identity, does not count at all. So it's very different than what other people saw in ancient times, where other people saw the father mattering, the mother not so much. Judaism says it's all about the mother, and the father's identity doesn't make someone Jewish or not. So what are the reasons for this matrilineal principle? Why is it that we follow the mother? Okay? And the reality is that race is a matter of descent. It's about where you came from. Religion and faith, presumably, should not be about where you came from, should be about what you believe. So why should the fact that a father or a mother professed a certain belief system have any effect on the child? In fact, when we take a step back, we could ask a question, why is Judaism a matter of descent at all? So if we look at the Torah, if you look in the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim, the Torah tells us, not only with you am I making this covenant and this oath, I am making this covenant with those that standing here with us today before God, and with those who are not here with us today. The Torah tells us clearly that God is making a covenant, that the covenant of Judaism isn't just for the people that stood at Mount Sinai, but that their children, their offspring, would also be a part of the covenant and would also be considered Jewish. God made a covenant with the Jewish people, as described in the verse we just quoted, and asserted that this covenant is for also those Jews who are not born yet. Whether they're born Jewish or later would decide to convert to Judaism, either way you put it, the covenant of God, the covenant of the Torah, includes them as well. And essentially, what it means to be Jewish is that there is a specific role that God intended for you to play in the story of reality, of life. Every single person, every single people, every single human that exists has their role that God sees for them, that God wants them to fulfill. And someone that's born Jewish has a unique journey and a unique destiny and a unique mission, a specific set of God-given responsibilities, as we spoke about in other classes. So, if we regard Jewish identity as something people could assume through merely choosing to identify as a Jew, then all descent would be should become irrelevant. If, however, we regard Jewish identity as someone born with a God-given Jewish mission and God-given Jewish responsibilities, and a non-Jewish identity has its own God-given set of non-Jewish responsibilities, then we need to find out which responsibility God gave us, and who we are and what God made us from birth becomes very, very important. So we have no way to know on our own what our mission is. We get our mission from understanding what Jewish law considers us, and that tells us what God wants from us. To summarize in short, to be a Jew means to be born with a specific of God-given responsibilities. The only way to know what type of mission God has in mind for you, what God has in store for you, is to look at the Torah and see what the Torah tells us about our mission. So there's actually an interesting response, interesting discussion by a rabbi, Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, and he offered a few thoughts on why it is that Jewish law says that Judaism goes by matrilineal descent. Okay? And I'll quote you from what he writes. According to the Torah law, he writes, a child's Jewishness depends on his or her mother. We do not know the reasons for Torah laws. Some offer biological-based rationale that the mother is more involved in the creation of a child and the formation of his body and soul. Some offer a nurture-based rationale that the mother's consistent influence is more decisive in shaping the children. Others suggest a practical rationale that we know indisputably the identity of one's mother. And ultimately, he writes, what matters is not the rationale for this law, but the foundational law itself, which is the bedrock of the Jewish family and has shaped the Jewish people. This is what Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg writes on this topic. And I just want to break down to you what his points that he's trying to make. He first states, the first thing he says is that what we mentioned at the outset of this course is that when we offer explanations in Judaism, we do so with hesitation. We know that our answers, even if they're correct, are only that our answers, even if we're correct, are only one aspect of the truth. We recognize that there is an infinite degree of depth to each of these laws, and even the answers we give are only one aspect, and ultimately we can't really wrap our head around why God wanted certain things in certain ways. At the same time, it is our responsibility to try to understand it as much as possible. So the point number one is, Judaism follows matrilineal descent because that's what God decided. Judaism follows matrilineal descent because that's the Torah tells us, and that's what God decided. Okay? Ultimately, now that God decided it that way, we try to understand it to the best of our ability. So that's point number one. After he establishes the fact that we should remember that this is God's rationale and doesn't always make sense to us, then he starts offering a few different types of reasons that we might be able to comprehend. His first suggestion is that the mother has more influence in the creation of a child. It's within the maternal body, it's in the mother's body that the child is transformed into a living being. For 9 months, the embryo and then the fetus receives all of its sustenance from its mother. And it's widely accepted that the mother's conduct, her eating habits, and so on and so forth, and even her psychological state of mind have an impact on the future, on the child's future. So that is the concept. Step number one is the mother. It's within the mother that the baby grows, so to speak, and the mother has tremendous influence over the future of the baby even before the baby is born. Indeed, the first biblical woman in the Torah, her name is Chava. What does Chava mean? Chava comes from the word life, the giver of life. As we see in the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 20, Adam called his wife Chava. Why did Adam call his wife Chava? The Torah tells us, because she was the mother of all of life. Chava's name means motherhood. And while there are father, this reflects an imbalanced contribution that the woman has in producing the offspring. It's the mother that does most of the work. It's the mother where the baby grows. It's in the mother where the baby grows, and it's the mother that God decided that Jewish and non-Jewish identity would be conveyed through parents. Choose the mother to be the conveyor of that identity over the father. That's reason number one that he gives. Then Rabbi Weinberg gives another reason for why it's such. And this reason becomes relevant after birth. The first reason is before birth. The second reason becomes relevant after birth. And what he says is the mother has the most influence over the child. Though you could probably argue that maybe in modern times, not necessarily it is always such. Many times the woman could be the breadwinner and the father could be a stay-at-home dad, and so on and so forth. But the concept is that it's not just in time, but it's also the type of attitude that the mother gives to the Jewish identity. As Rabbi Soloveitchik famously and eloquently depicted the unique his own relationship with his mother. What kind of Torah does a mother pass on? I admit that I am not able to define precisely the traditional role of the Jewish mother. Only by conversations with my mother. I used to watch her arranging the house in honor of the watch her recite the Torah portion every Friday night. Most of all, I learned that Judaism expresses itself not only in the formal compliance with the law, but also in living experiences. She taught me a warmth to mitzvot. I learned from her the most important things in life, to feel the presence of the Almighty and the being dry and insensitive. The laws of Shabbat, for instance, were passed on to me by my father. The Shabbat, as a living entity, as a queen, was revealed to me by my mother. The fathers knew much about the Shabbat. The mothers lived the Shabbat, experienced her presence, and perceived her beauty and splendor. So accordingly, it's reasonable for God to align the identity of a child with the identity of the mother. The child's primary influence, he argues, will instruct the child about how to live a life that is consistent with his or her identity is primarily by the mother. She brings the warmth, the beauty, and of the tradition to life. So that's the second rationale that Rabbi Weinberg brings. First of all, the first influences on a child, even before birth, is the mother. Secondly, after birth, the primary educator, so to speak, the child learns the most about life and how to live life from the mother as well. And ultimately, last but not least, his final rationale is rather famous. That matrilineal lineage is definite, whereas the father's identity is usually presumed. Right? Baby, you know who the mother of the baby is always. The father, hopefully you know. You assume that you know, but there could be a mistake in that. And therefore, God decided that Jewish identity to the parent is most verifiable. And indeed, this is one of the reasons offered why we traditionally mention, whenever you do a prayer for somebody, you do, in Judaism, we ask for a person's Hebrew name and their mother's name, because the mother is the most verifiable. And the third argument he gives is that Judaism goes by matrilineal descent, because that is the parent that you can guarantee to know who the parent is. He then concludes with one final point by stressing the relative lack of importance in understanding the tradition, the rationale of this law. The Jewish religion throughout our history. Ultimately, going back to his first point, saying that ultimately, even though I've given you three arguments and three reasons why it makes sense rationally for Judaism to go by matrilineal descent, ultimately these are limited ways of understanding, and ultimately the real reason for why Judaism goes by that's how it's been since the dawn of Jewish. Ultimately, it's God's logic, and even if we can argue or explain them away, why in this specific circumstance or in that specific circumstance it should be different, those wouldn't actually change reality. The Jewish law would still remain the Jewish law, that this is how it goes because God had decided it to be this way. So just to summarize, to wrap up, to recap the key points of today's class. Possible reasons for why God chose the mother to be the conveyor of her child's spiritual identity is: 1, the mother is the creation of the child. 2, she has more influence of the child's emotional and spiritual development. And 3, matrilineal lineage is definite. Those are 3 possible reasons why Torah tells us that it goes by the mother. But ultimately, we know it's so, and we follow that because that's how it's been throughout history, because the Torah tells us that that's what God wants. God tells us in the Torah that this is how it goes. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed and learned something today in today's class. And if you have any questions or comments or discussions, feel free to reach out wherever you'd like. And tomorrow's discussion that we'll be bringing up is: why do some Jews wear old-fashioned clothes? Why do sometimes Jews look like they walked out of the 18th century? Is the mitzvah of helping Jewish students connect to their Jewish identity through classes, Shabbat dinners, mezuzahs on their doors, etc. And that's the ultimate mitzvah you're getting. The ultimate prize is helping